Hello and welcome to the Brand Storytelling live streams for July 29th, 2020. I'm Drew Parkhill. Thanks for being with us. These live streams air every Wednesday, and our mission is to deliver the most timely and relevant information for our community of brands and their storytelling partners. These shows are designed for you, so please let us know how we can best serve the community by suggesting future topics and guests that would help you now as well as into the future. You can drop me a line. I'm Drew at BrandStorytelling.tv. Excited to have this group on today. We've got our host, Brian Newman, returning to the show, as well as the returning guest, Ben Proudfoot from Breakwater Studios, and welcoming Kirstin Falk from Schwab. With that, I'll pass it over to Brian. Thanks, take it away.
Thanks, Drew, and thanks everyone at Brand Storytelling for putting together these events throughout the summer and into September. And hello, Ben and Kirstin. Glad to have you here. I'll let you guys both introduce yourselves, starting with Kirstin at Schwab.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and happy to be here. So I was thinking about it today. I've literally been at Schwab for 6.5 years, which I never thought I would work for a large company that long, but it's been an amazing journey. And I'm the managing director, a pretty recent new title, which is brand activation. I'm responsible for finding new and unexpected ways to bring the brand to life. And that has enabled me to get to work with incredible people like Ben to help find stories that really emotionally connect with people and help them understand our powerful brand platform at Schwab. Prior to that, I've had actually a pretty unconventional career. I've worked in politics, nonprofit space. I was CMO of a small startup and ran an agency. So I've really sort of led a career of trying to do things that are a little bit different and allowed me to explore new ways of doing things. And so here I am at Schwab now.
That's great. And Ben Proudfoot, I know you, but introduce yourself to the group.
I'm Ben. My story starts in Nova Scotia in Canada. I always tell people that. Proud Nova Scotian. And I'm a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, and went to USC for film school and started a company called Breakwater Studios just as I was graduating. And it's really based around the idea of kind of rebooting a lot of the ideas of the early studio system of pulling all the creative departments together on one campus. Never thought I'd make documentaries, never thought I'd make shorts, never thought I'd get to collaborate with people like Kirstin. And really our company, the way it is now, is in large part thanks to Kirstin, because I just wanted to make films, and I wanted to, and it's hard, there's no economy around especially documentaries, but especially short documentaries. And so really our first partnership was with Kirstin and her team at Schwab, and we made a short documentary, and that has kicked off going on 5 years, I think, collaboration. More than 20 films together, and who knows how many deliverables. That has really, been the pride of my career, is everything that we've done together. And so now Breakwater Studios, which is based in Los Feliz in Los Angeles, we're a 15-person team, and we make anywhere between 30 and 50 short documentaries a year.
Great.
Yeah.
We're going to dig into more of this collaboration, but first, how and where are you both quarantining right now? I'll send it back to Kirstin first.
Yeah, I'm in my home in Mill Valley, which is just outside of San Francisco. And I think, some people know I had to go through chemo a couple months ago. So I have had to lead a pretty isolated life. And it's actually been really interesting. It's the first time in my life where I wasn't commuting to work every day and had such a set schedule. So while it's a pretty crazy world that we're living in, I have enjoyed having more free time than I've ever had in my life.
That's good. Ben, where are you in that crazy wall set up there?
I am at Delta State University in Mississippi, because the show must go on, Brian. And back in April, we developed a method of shooting that's very, it's basically a very bare bones skeleton approach that allows us to continue shooting interviews without ever being in the same room as the subject. And so we have been traveling around in RVs and trucks around the United States, and also doing some remote shooting in England and Myanmar as well. And we've been able to keep shooting. Well,
we're going to definitely want to talk about that a little bit more in a second, because everyone's trying to figure out how to shoot during COVID, and especially when your clients are isolated, and a lot of other people are too. But first, I want to ask how you two met. How did this relationship start?
You want me to take that, Kirstin?
Yeah, go for it, Ben. Yeah.
So how we met? Well, so as a student, I started making short documentaries and putting them on Vimeo. And some of them got Vimeo staff picks, and it was exciting. Tens of thousands of people would watch my films, and I kind of found an audience. And that put me in touch with Vimeo. At the time, Vimeo had a brand studio, really great guy named Jeff Hurlow, and they were trying to pair Vimeo filmmakers with brands. So I think it was Schwab, an agency, then Vimeo Brand Studio, and then Vimeo Brand Studio canvassed many filmmakers to send in multiple ideas, and that sort of went up the chain, and somehow things got picked. And that's how we first started working. I never met Kirstin. I don't even think I met anyone from the agency. And then after that project, I think Vimeo Brand Studio was shut down.
Yep.
And basically we just got in touch directly and started working on a project together directly, and just clicked.
Yeah.
And I fell hard for the Own Your Tomorrow spirit that Kirstin and her team had shaped. That was sort of the driving force behind Schwab, and I had a lot of films to make to back that up. So just took off like a rocket.
So Kirstin, tell us a little bit more, because you mentioned at the beginning that you're head of brand activation. It's not exactly the marketing department. So
no.
How are you structured there? And tell us a little bit more about how this, from your side, how this relationship developed with Ben.
Right. I'm incredibly lucky to have the role that I do, which I think is unique on some levels. Most marketing organizations are organized by channel, and you tend to see that in a lot of large enterprises, and you understand why. My team, I sort of look at us as more sort of a startup within the marketing organization. We are organized, what I say, sort of horizontally, which is our objective is to try and create a narrative across all of the different touch points and use storytelling as a way to do that. So we report directly to the head of brand, and our job really has been to find new and unexpected ways to bring the brand to life. And that can take many forms. When we first got started, the way that we did that, which is how we started working with Vimeo, was, we created a brief around the Own Your Tomorrow story, which is our fundamental belief that every human has the ability to create a better future for themselves. But in that journey, there are moments that it's difficult. And so our objective was, how can we inspire people? Because it's the same thing with finances, right? Everybody knows some of the things that they're supposed to do, but there's barriers that they hit along the way. So that's why we started working with Vimeo, which was to get people like Ben, filmmakers' interpretation of Own Your Tomorrow, which I think is more powerful than me simply telling people what Own Your Tomorrow should be.
Sure. And what was that first project?
So the first project we did with Vimeo was where we actually had a brief that we put out with working with the brand studio, where they asked, the first one was about 9 different filmmakers. The second one was the one that we did with Ben and with an agency out of New York, where we basically did another series with a theme more around sort of why not now, take a jump, take a leap, do these different things to get started in your life. And Ben did a very incredibly powerful video that actually resonated throughout the Schwab organization. And so it was a game changer for us, because when we first started doing this, there were many people who didn't believe in this way of telling stories, right? The bulk of the marketing organization has always been focused on advertising or product marketing. So this was a new way where you weren't telling somebody to buy something. And so, but we were able to show them the power of art and storytelling with that.
And then Ben comes back to you after Vimeo stops doing that whole department and that whole structure.
That went away.
And makes a pitch for another film, or did you start talking more broadly about other themes? How did that go on into this ongoing relationship?
Well, so one of the things that's really important to us and has always been a key component of why we lean into storytelling is that, you know, part of my objective is to humanize the brand, is to demonstrate to people that at Schwab, for us, we've always been a people-centric, customer-centric organization. Everything we've done has been on behalf of clients. And the great way to demonstrate that is through inspirational storytelling. So what we did, Ben came back with another, I think another agency brought Ben in for the round when we decided to focus more on sort of client stories and telling stories through our clients. And so that's how we got reconnected. And then once we did that, everybody realized at Schwab, I mean, the quality of Ben's work, his understanding of the brand, that just sort of demonstrated itself, and we built success upon success.
Right. And Ben, I'm gonna come back to you in just a second, but Kirsten, as a person within a brand, I know one of the big questions people always have is, how do you sell storytelling that's not product centric internally? How do you build that case?
I think some of it was luck, to be totally honest, but also a couple of things. One, I have been fortunate that I've had some incredible bosses, and I've worked with some people who got behind me and took a risk on this stuff. And so, you know, unfortunately, the way it works at large enterprises is you clearly need some of those executive champions, and I certainly have had some of those. Two, you also just have to do a lot of work internally to educate people. What I spend a lot of time doing is more internal roadshows and talking to people and understanding their perspective and their concerns, and then addressing those. And then I also believe you have to parallel path the measurement and analytics component of this, and acknowledge the messiness in it, as we all know. And actually, you can even get less data today than on some level we were able to before because of privacy concerns. But you have to make an effort to demonstrate why this sort of addresses the business objectives of the company. And those are all things that I've done.
Right. I want to dig into that a little bit more later, but I want to go back to Ben.
Yeah.
And Ben, ask you how you work, both philosophically in terms of your approach working with Schwab in particular, but also you have a unique style technically in how you work. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So yeah, from a philosophical approach, and we definitely work this way, Kirsten and I, we try to make films that we would make anyway as filmmakers. And what I mean by that is that as a filmmaker, you're very focused on the audience, right? And you're focused on something that is of and from you, that touches your creative whatever. And the only way to sort of scratch that itch is to make the film. And where does that realm of storytelling overlap with the stories that the brand wants to tell and be associated with? And so we work really, really, really hard to find those stories. And it may not even be the story, but it may be a way into the story or a creative take on a story or something like that. We work really hard to try to find something that organically fits in what the brand needs to do. And we look for partners who are willing to fight to get something like that, which is unorthodox in 2020, approved and get internal buy-in, which is exactly what Kirsten does. In terms of the technical elements of what we do, my style as a filmmaker, as a documentary filmmaker, it's very subject focused. So I would say 95% of the films that I make are focused on a single person and their subjective experience. And, you know, there's probably through lines in the kinds of films I like to make, but it really is more of a platform for the person speaking. Generally, the person is an ordinary person. They're looking directly into camera. And we also rely heavily on archival footage and just like really high-end B-roll sequences that we create. And really, we're trying to bring in narrative, scripted filmmaking technique and quality to the short documentary space. And that has sort of become a hallmark of my and thus Breakwater Studios work.
Yeah, and what's good about both your philosophy and your style technically is they add up to something that not only do you want to make as a filmmaker, but audiences want to watch, and that are probably then also therefore successful and make it easier for the brand to then continue to sell it internally, I would imagine. But this gives us an opportunity real quickly, Ben. You and I did a separate panel where we went in depth on your style, but just quickly tell people about the Enterotron that you use, and real quickly, because you're on location right now, some of the protocols you've built and ways you're working during COVID, because it's pretty fascinating and might be good for other producers and brands to know that this stuff can be done.
Yes, and I've been talking about this stuff a lot to try to spread the word of how we're doing this, but obviously every production company went from being a creative company to suddenly a safety critical company where we're asking people to show up to a potentially hazardous place to make art. So back in April, we hired all of our field production people, cinematographers, sound recordists, gaffers, producers, etc. And we put them in teams and we had them compete to come up with the best idea to make the safest way to execute an interview internationally, where we couldn't travel there, where we had no way of doing our normal method of shooting. And we developed what we call the SIP protocol. And essentially what it is, and I thought you might ask me about it, so I have a 3D model that I can
That'd be great.
up. I think, Drew, if you want to enable that, I can.
Yeah, you're all set. You're all set now. Thanks.
Let's see here.
So Ben's going to show us this 3D model. Yeah, there we go.
This is an example of sort of two-room setup. So essentially you have two rooms. One is where the interview subject is, and the other is where our camera technician is. It's a one-person crew. And essentially we build more or less a tent inside, which the camera lives in, and the camera is poking out of that tent. And on that camera is a teleprompter, which is showing a video feed of my face.
Which is coming, and the camera's on the other side of that teleprompter, because that's how the Enterotron works, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like everybody's familiar with a news anchor. It looks like they're looking at the camera, but actually they're reading their script. In this case, it's the exact same piece of technology, except instead of words, it's my face. So the subject has the unfortunate duty of looking at my face for several hours as I interview them.
But it personalizes it.
And it personalizes it, and the camera and everything disappears because it feels very much like an ordinary conversation over a dinner table or over Skype. But they don't have to see my face, which means that I can be calling in over Zoom. So for the first several times that we're on production number 12 now. The first several times I was in Nova Scotia and conducting interviews in London and California and Rangoon and Myanmar. And that single person, their job, in addition to setting this up, and we have 72-hour sterilization periods just on the very small percentage chance that something comes through contact, is in the other room, and they're basically pulling focus as the person comes in and out of the camera. And that's how we've been able to continue interviewing folks.
And you told me in another interview that oftentimes this is set up with separate HVAC systems, separate entrances and exits, so everything's completely isolated off. I think it's a great setup. You also mentioned you bought a bunch of long lenses to do some exterior shoots.
Yeah. We bought a lot of zoom lenses. This is our 50-page production protocol that we wrote over the course of I guess it was probably 4 or 6 weeks.
So this protocol can be sent in advance to a DP that you have worked with before, not worked with before, and they can get up to speed with your protocols.
Yes.
I'm assuming you can even share with the client to
Yep.
let them know that it's going to be safe.
Absolutely.
And real quickly, it's obvious that if you're watching this on a feed, your client could be watching it on a feed. Do you allow that? And what are your thoughts on how that works?
Yeah, so I've always been an advocate. I don't think Kirsten's ever been on set.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we started this before COVID.
Yeah, so Kirsten's never been on set. I generally advocate for the client to not be present.
Yeah, sure.
One of basically the main reason for that is because I feel like our subjects, who are usually ordinary people who have nothing to do with the brand, feel much more comfortable as this filmmaker is there to tell their story, rather than, this actually exists in a larger marketing construct. People don't really want to be thinking about that, and we're not going to get the right material. But at the same time, this is a passive way where you can not be there and you can sort of experience the interview. So I would definitely be open to it. The key thing is, how do you maintain that line of collaboration without actually impinging on the filmmaking process?
Right.
But honestly, that's one of the other sort of big pillars in our secret sauce, as I see it, Kirsten and I, is that I really trust Kirsten, and Kirsten really trusts me. So
Right.
it's off. We pick a subject, and it's like, see you at the rough cut.
So Kirsten,
Yeah.
from your perspective, was that a hard sell internally, or is that something you just make that choice yourself, that you're going to be that trusting of the filmmaker? And how did did you come into it just knowing that trust would be there, or did that develop over time with Ben? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, one, as a leader, I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at. And so, what I try and do is surround myself with really talented people. And I'm fortunate to have an incredible team. And in terms of partnerships, I seek people who are really good at what they do. And so on some level, I just inherently am the opposite of a micromanager. And I have been lucky at Schwab to be able to create what I call an agile marketing video process, which is eliminating the unnecessary sort of amounts of friction that can get created by having too many people involved in the decision-making process. So what we do up front with our projects is we're super clear with who's going to be involved in making the decision, how many people, how quickly and rapidly decisions will be made. And some of these things sound really elementary, but when you're dealing with a large enterprise, if you don't manage expectations, you can get into what I call death of consensus, which becomes awful and art gets destroyed in that process. So I've been very lucky, and we're scrappy. Our team's scrappy. We don't have huge budgets. So the way I got it sold really was saving money, which always works.
Yeah. That's good. In our pre-call, you mentioned that some themes have started to emerge around what works, and can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I think it's some of the things that, fundamentally it's important for us to have trust and establish that trust. And Ben and I have had that over the years. And so that kind of trust, in my view, enables amazing art to be created, because sometimes he might propose something that might make me a little bit uncomfortable, and I know it's going to make other people even more uncomfortable, but I've got the faith. And so I'm willing to go to bat for that. So I think trust obviously is key. I think also it's really easy to forget about how important the art and the soul of marketing is. And that at the end of the day, we're creating emotional connection with people, and we're building empathy and compassion into our work. And sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that. So I really try and lean into the creativity, into the art. And sometimes it just takes being willing to take a little bit of risk and be willing to take the heat if it doesn't work. And, you learn.
I think you also mentioned the importance of a good story and things like that. So
and absolutely. I mean, to me, it's like a Venn diagram, which is, you always start with a good story. And Ben has been amazing at finding good stories. I don't know what, but he does it. He finds incredible stories. Then for me, I have to figure out how relevant it is for the brand. And then the sweet spot is when we're able to have a great story that's relevant for the brand. And that's what we were able to do with Mayday. There was no doubt that our brand should have been telling that story. And it was a really, really good story.
Yeah, so Mayday was sent out in advance if people happen to look at the description, but tell us more about Mayday.
I mean, I'll let Ben,
Sure.
credit to Ben. I mean, certainly the backdrop on that was that Chuck was launching a book called Invested. And I saw it was an incredible opportunity to create a brand film. And so I immediately reached out to Ben.
And Ben?
Yeah, so I think when we started working together, I really didn't know that Charles Schwab was a person that was walking around. I unfortunately think I think it's becoming less true, but I think Chuck as a public figure.
I was the same way. I think it's great that you're changing that.
Yeah, I think he sort of found himself in the J.P. Morgan sort of lineup of of financial titans. So to know that he was a real person, to know that he had this incredible life story, and really the biggest thing that I thought was crazy was that he was a total disruptor in the 1970s. That his business model was really, it was just basically him and an idea at the very beginning, and he was out for the ordinary investor, to allow the average American, somebody who didn't have huge swaths of money, to invest in the stock market. And after reading his book, I really narrowed in on this moment, May 1st, 1975, when there was a shift in policy, and the stock market, which it's a little bit complicated, but it's pretty interesting. Before May 1st, 1975, there were fixed fees on making trades, which basically made trading under a certain amount of money stupid. And they deregulated that. So buying small amounts of stocks like we do today was suddenly desirable. And so it opened up the world to the stock market, basically. And I thought that was a pretty interesting story. And Chuck was one of the very early adopters of what was called the discount stock brokerage, of appealing to the average person, not just the big fishes with millions and billions of dollars. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting and cool story. And that's what we made the film about.
Yeah, now as someone who works with brands also, if someone told me they wanted to make a film about the CEO at a bank type company, I would usually think that's not going to be a good idea.
Yeah.
But it was a great project. I've watched the film twice, actually. I think it's the kind of film that could even play Film Fest, even though it's a very on-brand film. As a filmmaker, and I want to ask Kirsten from her perspective next, but as a filmmaker, how did you find the stories that would make that interesting to the public?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to, I think I think people get this thing of there are certain people who are good storytellers, and then there's everybody else. And don't even try to make a documentary about those people, because they don't have a story to tell. My opinion is anyone who's a human being on the face of the planet Earth, who has lived and loved and tried and failed and any of those things, has a story to tell. And if you can create a safe enough space for them to actually be themselves, to lose themselves in the conversation. And I do that with the Enterotron. I do that by showing up with empty hands and not having a list of questions. I do that by starting with, what's your first memory in life? Going through their whole childhood, you are able to capture somebody's soul because they're talking to you. Chuck and Ben had a conversation and we turned it into a movie. Very different from very talented marketing copywriters saying, here's what I think we should say. And I think that's why it's compelling, because Chuck's soul was caught.
And Kirsten, you have Ben showing up. He's not completely shaven. His hair is a little messed up there. And you're telling your CEO and their
Yes.
handlers that you want to put them in a room together without a bunch of minders, I imagine.
Yep.
How did you finagle that?
Yeah, I know. It's actually kind of amazing, to be honest. And it's testament to the success and the partnership that Ben and I have had over the years. And that wouldn't have been allowed with very many people. And I think it was just, we were incredibly fortunate to have people behind us and believing in this project. I mean, there was just sort of an organic sort of movement around making this happen. And so people really believed, at Schwab, they so understood the story that they wanted it to be told in a really creative way. And I think the term, I mean, Ben knows what I said to him. I was like, Ben, I want radical vulnerability in this. That is what makes people naturally sort of, that's what resonates with people. And everybody's seen Chuck in so much corporate footage, and all of that plays a role and it's important. But what I wanted him to do is lean into the human side, and Ben just naturally did that. And so even though, we literally limited the amount of people, Ben and I purposely designed an environment that would enable that sort of radical vulnerability, and not for it to become like this corporate, stiff, like, I'm telling you this stuff that people are tired of.
Right. Well, and then I know you've done other projects too, but
Yeah.
I know this project ended up kind of leading into an advertisement that you just ran during the time of COVID. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, two TV advertisements.
Okay.
Yeah, which is funny because I never considered myself an advertiser, but Ben and I did this kind of organically, which is the footage that he got was just so incredible. And it really, I mean, like I said, all the way throughout the organization, employees loved it. And so there was a historic moment last year when the industry went to 0 trades, which is kind of a crazy thing. And so we created the Agents of Change spot to sort of demonstrate that, Schwab had been the original disruptor, and we're still disrupting on behalf of the industry. And so we did the first spot around going to 0. And then most recently with the COVID stuff, it became very clear to us as a team, to Ben, that there was this moment to send a message out of hope and resilience and optimism. And that's what we were able to do working with Ben. And, I tell Ben what I need and he goes and creates beautiful things.
Yeah. This kind of leads in a little bit to a question from the audience, which is from Mark Patterson, asking Kirsten, how do you see the relationship between CSR, corporate social responsibility, and marketing changing, both at Charles Schwab as well as in general when it comes to brand storytelling and being socially conscious?
Yeah. Well, as someone who in a prior career worked in the nonprofit space, I've worked in the political space. I've always believed that brands should have purpose and meaning. And I think that what COVID has done is accelerate that trend in the brand building space for sure. But I think it's super important to not sort of whitewash, but for companies to actually do something and not just talk about doing something.
Right.
And so I'm a believer that there's a huge convergence of corporate social responsibility marketing. And as a matter of fact, we have, Schwab has a very robust foundation that's very involved in financial literacy projects across the country. And Ben and I have actually created some videos around that and some films talking about what people are doing in their communities. So huge believer. And I think that trend is accelerating for brands. I think it's kind of a moment of reckoning about that kind of stuff right now.
That's great. And you are still working together. So tell us a little bit more about some of the other projects you've done. We sent the links out, but just give us a quick overview of the types of projects you've done and maybe that you foresee maybe doing.
We've done many. I have dotted across the United States in all kinds of wonderful places I never would have been before. Gosh, so we did a Why This Road film about a substitute teacher. 2 Why Not Now films. We did a film about a Schwab client who fell off his boat in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and treaded water for 20 hours, and it was about the power of the mind to survive.
And he did his own stunt, right? Ben, he went out.
Insisted on doing his own stunts. Yeah. I was like, this guy's gonna die on the movie about how he almost died. No, but we were very safe. I also wanted to point out that on the day I interviewed Chuck, I shaved and I wore a collared shirt.
All right.
I just want to put that out there. We've done a lot of work with Schwab's foundation. I think we've made 6 films on different organizations that Schwab has given to, and part of that gift is a film that tells their story. And that's actually a really great example of how Schwab works. We will make this film about this organization, and rather than this big Charles Schwab website at the end of it or something like that, it's the organization's website. And that it's little things like that. Oftentimes that's what makes or breaks some of these films, is the copy, the order of things, the prominence of things on the end cards and CTAs. And Kirstin and her team pay very careful attention to that throughout all our projects. What comes next, you'll just have to see. It's all under 7 layers of NDA.
But we're excited. We're excited.
Well, tell us about the ones that you did. You just mentioned this in regards to being on the charity's website. But talk a little bit more about the distribution and how these are getting out to people. They're shorts, most of them, right? All short?
Huh?
They're all shorts, and a couple have been became ads, but they're all shorts, right?
Yeah, and this is where I felt like, when we first started working together, Ben was very focused on sort of the film and making that, and I feel like we've been able to help him and his team sort of understand the power of distribution. So the way I view it is the longer form content, the 3 to 5 minute pieces that we create with Ben, that's kind of your anchor. But we have an opportunity to develop a narrative across many platforms and many channels. And so I have super smart people on my team who, working closely, once we start to understand sort of the story that is developing, then we look at the different ways to optimize on the different platforms. So most of our work would include, being on YouTube, being on Facebook, and being on Twitter, and being on Instagram, creating stories. We've created 6-second ads on YouTube, because another part of my role at Schwab has been marketing innovation. So our team tends to pilot all of the new sort of storytelling formats, and we've experimented with a lot of things. But I'm a huge believer, and we've looked at, we create trailers. We do a lot of different stuff to kind of help support the story, drive awareness of the story, and get people to watch the films.
And you mentioned near the beginning of the panel that part of this is the data collection that helps you continue to sell it. Tell us a little bit more about the types of data that you're collecting and analyzing. Obviously, some of it might be proprietary, but the general scope of what you're doing.
Yeah, well, clearly, obviously the metrics fall in the large bucket of brand awareness and brand building. And, for many years, most of us used engagement metrics that we were able to get from the platform in terms of how people were interacting with the content. Those engagement metrics are easier to get, although now, because of privacy stuff, we're not getting as much data from some of the platforms like, Facebook and Instagram. But we do have a way at Schwab of pulling that data in and holistically looking at an attribution model that enables us to give credit for the different interactions and sort of and develop a better understanding of what further action people took after interacting with our content. And then on a larger level, I believe in long-term growth, right? That our work is meant to inspire and build awareness over the long haul. Those types of brand metrics are a little bit more difficult. We obviously experiment with all the different brand lift studies. I have challenges with all of them, but we continue. And I think there's still opportunity in this space to be better on telling sort of that long-term growth story. So, yeah.
And but it's not just about sales or signups. It's about brand awareness and all these other things as well.
No, and I started that years ago. In terms of kind of building out and having partners within the analytics teams and data and measurement teams and media teams to develop a stream of work around generating, like understanding brand metrics, not just looking at conversion metrics. We certainly have had those, and those are secondary, but our primary metrics have been, people interacting with the content and talking about it and sharing it.
You mentioned that it goes on social media and you do different formats and all that kind of stuff. Does it end up on the Schwab app ever?
No, there's an opportunity there for sure, but we have not made it there yet.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
I've heard of some people where that does lead to a lot more interaction through the app, so I was just wondering. We have another question from the crowd.
Yeah.
How do you work with and plug into the digital team and media teams? Also, do these partners sometimes slow down or try to alter this type of work to make them more like advertising?
It's a good question. I think the benefit of being at Schwab for this many years now, I've built relationships with all of those teams, and we've tried to take a very collaborative approach. And so there's always a balance of having the right people in the room so that they feel bought into your work, versus allowing people to slow things down. And I kind of see that as a big part of my role. Sometimes I have to step in and be hardcore, and keep things moving. But again, part of my job is to outline a process and be super clear on people's roles and expectations. And so, that's how we've been able to do it. And again, our work has been very supported just because of our success.
Another question from the audience, Ben. Apparently a quote a while back in an article, you stated, marketing is a withdrawal from your audience. Branding is a deposit with your audience. When did you figure this method out and throughout your career, and realize that this is a better approach?
I was worried what I was quoted as saying. Yes, I actually very much, I think that's a super helpful way of thinking about it. I don't know where I got that. But yeah, the idea that, that marketing, right? Direct marketing saying, this is our product, isn't it great? You should buy it, XYZ. That's a withdrawal in brand affinity. People see that. They might do the thing you want them to do, but it's a little bit like, I really see brands as sort of people in the eyes of the consumer. And, a friend can ask us for a favor or to do something, but like they lose a few brownie points in the process. And I think branding, and especially brand filmmaking, is an opportunity to build up brownie points by making a deposit in how the audience thinks. If somebody watches a film that's meaningful to them, that touches their heart, and when I say that, I don't just mean like it's cute. I mean like it makes them think about their father that passed away, or it said something true about what it means to have a disabled child, or it advocates for financial literacy in the classroom that means something. Specific, worthy things that really mean things to real people. And Charles Schwab was there to present that film, was responsible for bringing that to them. That's a deposit. And people will say, and they'll log that. And then later on, when the company does marketing, suddenly Charles Schwab, which has all this positive affinity, has a big well to draw on to do marketing. So I think branding is something that you really have to keep up with. It's a seesaw, which is really oftentimes why we're collaborating with PR and communications teams and not the advertising teams, because PR and communications is often dealing with the long-term story of the company versus like immediate revenue results.
And Kirsten, you agree with all that in this approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's even more meaningful in this moment that we are experiencing as a society, that brands have an opportunity to focus on that sort of that human connection, because I think that people are seeking that and searching for that. And it shouldn't always be about trying to get somebody to purchase your product. People should believe in companies.
That's great. So we try to keep these at about 45 minutes.
Okay.
But I want to give you all the chance to give your last thoughts to the audience on working together, storytellers and brands. Any last lessons learned that we didn't get to cover that you'd like to bring up?
Well, I think it's super important for those of us on the call who are working, in large enterprises and corporations and conservative organizations, being connected directly with the creators and the filmmakers and the artists is so energizing for me. And I really recommend it. And I think it's the future. I think that's just incredible. And I think beautiful things happen as a result of it. So it's been really energizing for me.
That's great. Ben?
Yeah, I think I feel grateful to have had such a long and ongoing partnership with Kirstin. And I think if I had a parting word, I would just say that to study Kirstin's model, it really works, because not only does Kirstin trust me to go off and make a really powerful film, but as a filmmaker, like an artist, you want to trust that if you're going to put your heart and soul into something, if you're going to go those 10 extra miles to make something really good, that whoever you are handing that baby over to is going to fight for it, is going to make the best of it. That is the trust that gets the best out of me, and thus the rest of our team. I can tell my cinematographer, my editors, let's do it. No, this is for Kirstin. She's going to fight for it. And she does. And that's why the work is good. So I think that mutual trust that really started with Kirstin, that I try to duplicate in every one of our relationships, is something that should be studied by all brands. And it really emanates from her.
Great. Well, Rick is mentioning in the comments that they're working on something that overlaps with that. But you guys have done incredible work together. It's been really fun speaking with you both about this, watching the films. I look forward to seeing more. And congrats on all the great work you've done. And I'll turn it back over to Drew. But thanks again, both of you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks so much for
Pleasure.
giving us this opportunity to sort of look under the hood of this partnership and see some of the workings of it. And I think there's a lot of value here for our audience. If you're just joining us, or if you missed a part of this stream, you can catch it on YouTube tomorrow. You can go to BrandStorytelling.tv/streams to stay up to date. Thanks so much, Kirstin and Ben, and thanks, Brian, for returning to host once again. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.